Evan had always enjoyed the quiet of early mornings on his farm. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the air was still crisp with the coolness of the night. As he walked outside to check on the crops, he noticed something strange near his vegetable garden. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a rabbit, but as he got closer he saw that it wasn't an animal at all. It was a woman. A woman with strange green skin and large eyes that shone with fear. Evan stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. He had seen some strange things in his life, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The woman was kneeling in his garden, grabbing handfuls of vegetables and stuffing them into a bag. She seemed frantic, her hands shaking as she worked quickly, clearly desperate. At first, Evan wasn't sure what to do. Should he call the authorities? Was she some kind of thief? But then, as he took a step forward, the woman froze. She looked up at him with wide eyes, her expression full of panic. The vegetables slipped from her hands and fell to the ground with a soft thud. I'm sorry, the woman said, her voice trembling. She spoke in a language Evan didn't understand, but her fear was clear. Evan's first instinct was to run. But as he stood there, something in her eyes stopped him. There was a deep sadness in them, something more than just fear. She wasn't a threat, she was in trouble. He took another step forward, trying to sound calm. It's okay.
Nice.
I'm not going to hurt you, he said slowly, making sure his voice didn't sound threatening. The woman blinked at him, her body tense as though she was ready to flee at any moment. She seemed to be sizing him up, trying to figure out if he could be trusted. Then, after a long moment of silence, she finally spoke again, but this time, it was in a language Evan could understand, though her accent was heavy. Double quotes. Please. I didn't know where else to go, she said, her voice barely a whisper. My children. They're hungry. I had to get food for them. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't mean to steal, I just. I had no choice. Evan was taken aback. Stealing food was one thing, but hearing the desperation in her voice made him feel uneasy. He stepped closer, looking around at the small garden she had ransacked. His thoughts raced. What kind of person was she? Where did she come from? And why did she look so different from any person he had ever seen? Who are you? Evan asked, his voice softer now. The woman's eyes flickered toward the bag of vegetables, then back to Evan. I'm not from here, she said, her voice trembling again. I'm from far away. My name is Lyra. I'm a Sara. She said the last word with a tone that sounded almost like it was supposed to mean something important. Evan blinked. Sara, he repeated, not recognizing the name. Where are you from? Lyra hesitated, as if considering whether to tell him the truth. Finally, she spoke, her words coming in a rush. My ship crashed here, alone with my children. We've been hiding. I've been hiding. I didn't know who else to ask for help. Her voice cracked as she finished, and Evan could see the tears starting to form in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, as if ashamed of showing weakness. Evan's heart softened. It was hard for him to believe the story, but the way she spoke, the raw emotion in her voice, he couldn't help but believe her. She wasn't lying. She was in trouble, and she needed help. But he had so many questions. What was a Sara? How did she end up here? Why hadn't she asked someone else for help? Sorry about your ship, Evan said, trying to make sense of it all. But why come here? To my farm. Lyra looked down, her shoulders slumping. It was the only place I could find. I don't know where else to go. I had no choice. She bit her lip, trying to hold back another sob. My children, they're sick. They can't travel. They can't. They need food. I didn't know what else to do. I thought I could find something here. Evan's mind raced. He was a simple man, a farmer, not someone who was used to dealing with anything this strange. But there was something about Lyra, about the desperation in her voice, and the helplessness in her eyes that made him pause. This wasn't just some petty theft. It was a mother trying to save her children. After a long moment of silence, Evan spoke again. I'll help you, he said quietly. I can give you food, but you have to tell me more. Who are you running from, and why are you hiding here? Lyra looked up at him, her face a mixture of relief and fear. She was so tired, so worn out from the weight of everything she was carrying. She nodded slowly, the tears still there, but now she was looking at him with hope. "I will tell you everything," she said softly. "But you must help me, please, my children. They are dying of hunger." Evan's heart went out to her. He had no idea what kind of trouble she was in. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't turn her away. Evan stood still, his mind racing. He couldn't understand everything Lyra had said, but her desperation was clear. He glanced at the bag of vegetables on the ground, which now looked more like an offering than a theft. Her eyes were locked on him, full of hope, but something in her voice, something about her plea, made him feel uneasy. He didn't know much about alien species, nothing at all, really. But this was different. Lyra wasn't a criminal. She wasn't here to cause harm. She was a mother, and all she wanted was to save her children. "I'll help you," Evan said, his voice gentle but firm. "I don't know much about your people, but I can't just leave you like this." Lyra's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't out of fear. There was relief in her expression, as if she had finally found someone who didn't want to turn her away. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "You don't know how much this means to me." Evan gave her a small smile, trying to ease her worries. "It's no problem," he said, even though he had no idea what he was getting into. "But I need to know more. Who are you running from? Why can't you just go back to your people?" Lyra looked down, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "We were betrayed," she said quietly, as if speaking the words made it all the more real. "My people were peaceful, but our enemies wanted to destroy us. We fled to Earth, hoping for safety. But my ship crashed, and now I am alone with my children." Evan listened carefully, taking in every word. He could see how much pain this alien woman had been through. Her eyes were filled with loss, and her shoulders slumped with the weight of everything she had endured. "Do you know if anyone else made it?" he asked, his voice soft. Lyra shook her head. "I don't know. I haven't seen anyone else for weeks. My children, they're all I have left now." The quiet that followed was heavy, both of them lost in their thoughts. Evan had always been a simple man. He wasn't someone who had ever faced anything like this. He had always been just a farmer, looking after his land. But this was different. Lyra's story, the pain in her voice, made him feel like he had to do something. "We'll figure this out," Evan said finally. "I can't promise you that everything will be okay, but I'll help you get the food you need. We'll get your kids the help they deserve." Lyra's head snapped up at his words, her eyes wide in disbelief. You will?" Evan nodded. "I will, but first you need to tell me everything. You can't just hide forever." "I need to know what we're up against." Lyra hesitated, biting her lip, clearly torn. She glanced at the bag of stolen vegetables as if it reminded her of everything she was risking. Finally, she spoke. "They're called the Zalrith," she said quietly, as if saying the name out loud was a reminder of the danger she was in. "They destroyed our planet, my people. They tried to stop them, but we couldn't. The Zalrith have been hunting us down for years. After our ship crashed, we didn't know where to go. We thought Earth would be safe, but I was wrong. They'll come looking for us, I'm sure of it." Evan was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had just told him. The idea of an alien race, bent on destruction, hunting down a peaceful people, it sounded like something out of a movie. But Lyra's fear was real. Her desperation was real. This wasn't some fiction. This was someone's life. "We have to act quickly, then," Evan said finally. "You can't stay here forever. The government might find out about you. Have to be careful." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't want to cause any trouble. I just want to take care of my children." Evan understood that. He wasn't some hero or soldier. He was just a man who wanted to help. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. "I can get food, but I'll need your help too," he said. "I don't have much, but I'll do what I can. And if we need to get out of here quickly, we'll figure something out." Lyra hesitated, but then stood up, determination in her eyes. "I'll help however I can. My people are strong. We don't give up." Evan smiled. reassured by her strength. She wasn't just some helpless woman, she was a fighter. Good, he said. First, we'll need to get to town. I'll come with you. But we'll have to be careful. You don't want to draw attention. Lyra's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded. She wasn't used to asking for help. She wasn't used to trusting others. For her children, she would do anything. As they walked toward the farmhouse, Evan felt a strange mix of emotions. He had no idea how deep this situation would go. But one thing was clear. He couldn't just walk away. Lyra was a mother in need, and that was something he understood. He had always done his best to help people in trouble, and now fate had brought him face to face with someone who needed him more than ever. Thank you, Lyra said quietly, her voice full of sincerity. For everything. Evan nodded, his heart swelling with empathy. It's nothing, he replied. I'm just doing what anyone would do. But deep down, Evan knew this was no ordinary situation. There was more at stake here than just food. There was a woman fighting to save her children, and he was about to be pulled into something far bigger than he could ever have imagined. The sun was climbing higher in the sky by the time Evan and Lyra reached the farmhouse. The air had warmed, and the once cold morning was now filled with the quiet hum of a new day. Evan walked in front, his mind racing with questions. He had no idea what to expect next. But one thing was clear, Lyra's situation was worse than he had thought. Lyra followed closely behind, still clutching the bag of vegetables. She looked down at the ground, her pace slow, as if she were afraid to look anyone in the eye. Evan could sense the weight of the world on her shoulders. She wasn't just a stranger from another world, she was a mother trying to protect her children from a harsh reality that seemed beyond their control. When they reached the farmhouse, Evan turned to face her. I can help you get food, but I need to know more about what's going on. Why are you running? Why can't your people just come here for help? Lyra hesitated. She knew the answer, but it was hard to say out loud. It was hard to admit that the peaceful life she had once known was now gone forever. She didn't know if Evan would understand, but she couldn't hide the truth anymore. My people, the Sara, we lived in peace for many years. She began, her voice soft, almost distant. We didn't want to fight. We didn't want to conquer anyone, but then the Zalrith came. They came with weapons, with fire, and they destroyed everything. Our cities, our homes, our farms. We had to run. Evan listened closely, his brow furrowed in thought. He couldn't imagine what that must have been like, having everything you knew torn apart. But Lyra wasn't finished. She wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek before continuing. They hunted us down one by one. My family was scattered. I lost my parents. I lost my friends, she said, her voice trembling now, and my children. I had to protect them. I thought Earth would be safe, but I was wrong. The Zalrith will find me. They'll find my children. And they won't stop until we're all gone. The weight of her words hung in the air. Evan could see the fear in her eyes. He had heard stories of wars, of battles between species, but hearing it from someone who had lived through it made it feel all too real. She wasn't just asking for help, she was begging for survival. Evan took a deep breath. Soldier, and he didn't have any answers. He was just a farmer. But he couldn't turn his back on her. Not now. Not after hearing her story. Listen, Evan said, his voice calm but firm. I don't know much about these Zalrith, or what your people have gone through, but I do know one thing. You and your children are welcome here. I'll help you. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to tell me everything. Hey. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. You'll help us. Even after everything I've told you? Evan nodded. Yes, I don't know how much I can do, but I'll do what I can. I'm not going to let you starve. I'm not going to let anyone harm you or your kids. Lyra stood there for a moment, stunned. She wasn't used to people offering help. In her world, trust was rare. But there was something about Evan's sincerity that made her believe he meant it. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, Evan replied. We just need to figure out a plan. He paused, thinking about what needed to be done. There was no time to waste. The longer Lyra stayed on his farm, the more likely it was that someone would come looking for her. The government, the military, or even the Zalrith, they would all be threats. They needed to move fast. Okay, here's the deal, Evan said, his tone shifting to one of practicality. We're going to get you the food you need, but we're also going to figure out a way to get you and your children out of here if things get bad. I'll help you hide. We'll make sure you're safe. But you have to promise me one thing. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. What do you mean? You have to promise me that you'll trust me, Evan said. I know. This is scary, but we can do this. We'll get through it together. Lyra nodded slowly, her expression softening. She didn't have much of a choice. Evan was the only one willing to help her, and she had to believe that this human, this stranger, would do everything in his power to protect her children. I promise, she said quietly. Good, Evan said. Now, let's get to work. The two of them spent the next few hours gathering food. Evan led Lyra to the nearby barn, where he kept his supplies, and they began filling bags with vegetables, grains, and anything else they could carry. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for now. Evan worked quickly, his mind always thinking ahead, wondering what would happen if the Zalrith found them. He had no idea what they would do or how to stop them, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let Lyra face it alone. As the sun began to set, Evan looked at the bags they had packed. They had enough food to last for a few days. But they needed more. They needed a plan. And more than anything, they needed to be ready for whatever was coming. Evan turned to Lyra, who was sitting quietly watching the sunset. She looked exhausted, her face tired and worn. But there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was small, but it was there. We'll figure it out, Evan said quietly, more to himself than to her, one step at a time. Lyra looked up at him, her voice soft. Thank you, Evan. You don't know how much this means to me. Evan smiled. It's nothing, just doing what's right. But in that moment, as he looked at Lyra and thought about her children, he realized this was no ordinary situation. It wasn't just about food, it was about survival. And Evan had just agreed to become part of a much bigger story than he ever could have imagined. The next morning came quickly. Evan was up before the sun, his thoughts still heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. He had helped Lyra gather enough food to keep her children fed for a while, but it wasn't enough to keep them safe. Not if the Zalrith came looking. Not if anyone else found out about her. He walked out to the barn to check on the supplies. It felt like a normal day until he saw Lyra standing by the fence, looking out toward the horizon. She was so quiet, her face filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She had told him she didn't know where else to go, but he knew that she couldn't stay here forever. They had to move her and her children to a safer place. Evan approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. We're going to need more than what we have here, he said, breaking the silence. Lyra turned to him, her eyes still clouded with worry. I don't want to be a burden, she said softly. I just want my children to survive. I don't know where to go, and I don't know how to protect them. Evan gave her a reassuring smile. You're not a burden. We're in this together. We'll figure it out. He paused for a moment before continuing. There's one place I think we can go. It's where you said your ship crashed, right? Eyes widened slightly. You want to go there? She asked, her voice a mix of surprise and concern. It's dangerous. I know, Evan said. But if we're going to find a way to get you and your children to safety, we need to see it. We need to know what we're dealing with. Lyra hesitated. She had been avoiding returning to the crash site for weeks, afraid of what she might find. But Evan's determination seemed to make her feel that maybe, just maybe, it was the right thing to do. She nodded slowly. I'll go with you, she said quietly. Evan gathered a few things from the barn: food, water, and a few tools. He wasn't sure what they would find, but they needed to be prepared. He looked back at Lyra. Are you ready? She nodded. I am. The two of them set out on foot, walking slowly toward the edge of the property. The path wasn't long, but the journey felt heavier with every step. The crash site was located in a remote area, deep within a forest, just a few miles from the farm. Evan had never been there before, but Lyra had described it in detail. He could sense the fear in her as they walked, her pace slow and cautious. As they moved deeper into the woods, the air grew thicker, the sounds of the farm behind them fading into the distance. The trees grew taller, blocking out the sunlight, and the world around them felt like it was closing in. Evan glanced at Lyra, noticing how tense she had become. Her eyes were darting around, always on alert. "Lyra, you okay?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She nodded, though the movement seemed more like a reflex than a confirmation. "I'm just nervous. I don't know what we'll find there." Evan understood. The unknown was always the hardest part. But he wasn't about to turn back. They had come this far. The forest grew denser as they continued walking. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the clearing where the ship had crashed. It was a large, open area surrounded by trees, with remnants of metal and broken pieces scattered across the ground. The ship itself lay in the center, half buried in the earth, its twisted remains a stark reminder of the destruction that had brought Lyra to Earth in the first place. Evan stopped in his tracks, taking in the sight. The wreckage was far worse than he had imagined. It looked as though the ship had been torn apart on impact, the twisted metal structures barely recognizable. He could see scorch marks on the ground, signs of the battle that had probably followed the crash. And then there were the remains of what looked like alien technology devices, weapons and machinery, all of which seemed foreign and dangerous. Lyra's face went pale as she stepped forward, her breath catching in her throat. She had been avoiding this place for so long, afraid of what she might find. Now that she was here, it was as if everything she had tried to forget came rushing back in a flood of memories. The explosion, the screams.
Ow!
The bodies. Evan watched her closely. He knew how hard this must be for her, but they couldn't afford to be afraid. Not now. Not when her children's lives were at stake. "We need to move quickly," he said, his voice steady. Lyra nodded, trying to gather her thoughts. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to find here, but she knew they had to keep moving. They couldn't stay in one place for long. Not with the Zalrith possibly still searching for her. Together. They moved closer to the wreckage, stepping carefully around the debris. Lyra's eyes scanned the area, her gaze sharp, looking for any signs of life or danger. After a moment, she spotted something. "There," she whispered, pointing toward a cluster of rocks at the edge of the wreckage. "That's where I left the children." Evan's heart pounded as he followed her direction. He wasn't sure what they would find, but he was ready to help however he could. They made their way toward the rocks, and as they approached, they heard soft cries. Evan's eyes widened in surprise. He had expected the worst, but instead he saw two small figures huddled together. They were alien children, just as Lyra had described. They were weak, their skin pale and their eyes clouded with hunger and exhaustion. But they were alive. Lyra rushed forward, her heart filling with relief as she knelt beside them. "My children," she whispered, pulling them into her arms. "You're safe now. You're safe." Evan stood back, giving her a moment with her children. He watched, his chest tight, as Lyra whispered words of comfort to them. It was clear that the children had been through too much. They were fragile, their bodies too thin, and their faces reflected the toll of hunger and fear. But for the first time in a long while, Lyra seemed to find some peace. She wasn't alone anymore. Evan had promised her that he would help. Now he was keeping that promise. Evan stood at the edge of the wreckage, watching as Lyra gently held her children close. Her eyes were filled with relief, but there was still fear in them. The children, two small aliens, no older than 5 or 6 in Earth, years looked weak and fragile. It had clearly been through much more than any child should have to endure. Lyra whispered softly to them, her voice full of comfort, trying to calm them after everything they had been through. Evan could see the tenderness in her touch, the way she protected them. Even when the world seemed to be falling apart around her, he felt a strange sense of responsibility, as if helping them wasn't just the right thing to do. It was something he had to do after a few minutes. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly.
Thank
You for bringing us here. Evan smiled gently. You don't need to thank me. You've been through so much. I'm just glad I could help. He didn't know how to make sense of everything that was happening. Lyra was from another world. Her people were hunted by the Zalrith, and now she was on Earth, hiding from the danger that followed her everywhere. But for the first time since they had met, Evan felt a sense of purpose. He was doing something important. He was helping a mother and her children survive. We need to get you out of here, Evan said, his voice low but urgent. The longer we stay, the more chance there is that someone will find us. And if the Zalrith are still looking for you, they'll come here. Lyra nodded. I know, but I don't know where to go. I don't know how to escape them. I thought Earth would be safe, but I was wrong. I don't want to put you in danger. Evan stepped closer to her, his expression serious. You're not putting me in danger. I made a promise to you, and I'll keep it. We'll figure something out, but we need to move fast. I couldn't stay by the wreckage any longer. The children needed medical care, and the longer they remained in the same place, the more likely it was that someone would discover them. Evan thought for a moment, trying to come up with a plan. I have an old cabin about 5 miles from here, Evan said, his voice steady. It's secluded. We can hide there for a while. It's not much, but it'll keep you safe until we figure out what to do next. Lyra's eyes widened. You have a cabin? You'd take us there? Evan nodded. It's the safest place. I know. We can get there without being seen. But we need to leave now, before it gets dark. Lyra didn't hesitate. She carefully stood up, cradling her children in her arms. They were still too weak to walk, and Evan could see the exhaustion in Lyra's face. He didn't blame her. She had been through so much, and now, in this moment of uncertainty, she was relying on him. Thank you, Evan, she said, her voice full of emotion. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Evan replied with a smile. We'll get through this together. With the children settled in Lyra's arms, Evan led the way through the forest, making sure to keep an eye out for any sign of danger. He knew the area well, but there was always the chance that something or someone might be watching. The last thing they needed was to be caught. As they walked, Lyra spoke softly to her children, trying to keep them calm. She didn't want them to see the worry on her face, but Evan could tell that she was just as afraid as he was. The fear of being caught by the Zalrith, the fear of losing her children, it was a weight she carried with every step. The forest was dense, the trees blocking out most of the light as they made their way toward the cabin. Evan led them down a narrow path, careful to avoid the main trails. He had to stay off the beaten path if they were going to remain hidden. Lyra was silent for most of the walk, but Evan could sense that her mind was racing. She must have been thinking about what came next, what would happen after they reached the cabin. What would she do if the Zalrith found them? How could she keep her children safe? They walked for almost an hour before they reached the cabin. It was small and weathered, but it was tucked away deep in the woods, hidden from view. Evan opened the door and led Lyra inside. The air was cool and dry, and the place smelled of wood and earth. Wasn't much, but it was enough. Lyra looked around the small cabin, her eyes softening as she took in the space. It's perfect, she said, her voice full of relief. Thank you. Evan moved quickly, making sure the windows were shut and that everything was secure. We'll stay here for now, he said. It's safe. But we need to figure out what to do next. Lyra nodded, carefully laying her children on the small bed in the corner. She sat beside them, her face filled with exhaustion. She had been holding them for so long, and now that they were safe, she could finally let her guard down, if only for a moment. We'll get through this, Evan said, sitting down across from her. One step at a time. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know how to repay you for all of this. Evan smiled. You don't need to. Just focus on keeping your children safe. Lyra nodded, her gaze falling back too. Her children. They're all I have left. I'll do whatever it takes to keep them alive. Evan watched her for a moment before standing up. I'll keep watch tonight. You need rest. We all do. Lyra didn't argue. She needed the rest more than anything, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to sleep, knowing that for now, they were safe. But Evan knew that this was only the beginning. The Zalrith were still out there. The danger wasn't over. But he also knew that he would do whatever it took to protect Lyra and her children. He had made a promise, and he wasn't about to break it. The small cabin was quiet as night settled over the woods, as the air had turned cool and the shadows stretched long across the floor. At us, Evan sat by the window, his eyes scanning the forest, always alert. The peace of the night was a false sense of security. The danger was still out there, lurking just beyond the trees. Lyra's children were asleep in the corner of the cabin, their fragile bodies finally at rest after the long day. Lyra, too, had fallen asleep, her exhaustion taking over. She had fought to keep her eyes open, but eventually her body gave in, and she collapsed beside her children. Evan, though, couldn't rest. Not yet. He needed to think about what came next. The silence in the cabin was only broken by the soft sounds of the forest outside. The wind rustled the leaves, and the occasional hoot of an owl could be heard in the distance. Evan stood up, his thoughts heavy with uncertainty. He had done everything he could to get them here, to get them safe for the moment. But he knew this couldn't last forever. He paced back and forth, his mind spinning with ideas. Where could they go? What could they do to keep Lyra and her children safe? He couldn't keep them hidden in this cabin forever. The risk of discovery was too great. The government, the military, they would eventually find out about Lyra. And when they did, they wouldn't hesitate to take action. The Zalrith were another danger altogether. If they came looking for her, Evan had no doubt that they would stop. At nothing to get her back, she had told him enough to understand the depth of their cruelty. Suddenly a soft voice broke through his thoughts. Evan? Lyra's voice was weak, hoarse from exhaustion. But it was enough to bring him back to the present. He turned to see her sitting up on the bed, her eyes bleary but alert. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of concern and gratitude. Sorry I fell asleep, she said quietly. I just... I'm not to thank you for all you've done. Evan walked over to her, kneeling down beside the bed. You don't have to thank me. I promised I'd help you, and I'm doing just that. Lyra gave him a small smile. It was faint, but it was there. I don't know what I would have done without you. You've already done so much. I'm not done yet, Evan said softly. We need to figure out what to do next. Can't stay here forever. Lyra nodded slowly. I know. I've been thinking about that too. But where can we go? Don't have a home anymore. I don't know where to take my children. Evan sat down beside her, his face serious. We'll figure it out. I know this area, and I have a few contacts who might be able to help us. But we need to stay hidden for now. Can't let anyone know you're here. Lyra's eyes filled with fear again. But what if the Zalrith find us? For me, Evan's voice was firm. We won't let them. We'll move quickly, and we'll stay one step ahead. I won't let anything happen to you or your children. Lyra looked at him, her eyes full of emotion. She wasn't used to relying on anyone. She had always been the one to protect her children, to keep them safe. But now she had no choice. She had to trust Evan. She had to believe that he would keep his promise. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Evan gave her a reassuring smile. You don't have to thank me. We're in this together. As the night wore on, Evan and Lyra talked quietly, discussing their options. They knew that they couldn't stay in one place for too long. The longer they stayed in the cabin, the more likely it was that someone would find them. They needed to leave the woods, to get to a safer place somewhere they could regroup. Somewhere they could plan their next move. The next morning they woke early. Lyra's children were still asleep, their small bodies curled up together for warmth. Evan could see how exhausted she was, both physically and emotionally. She had been through so much, and yet she still carried the weight of everything on her shoulders. We'll leave soon, Evan said, his voice calm but determined. But we need to get you and your children ready first. You'll need food. And we need to get you some new clothes. Lyra looked at him, her face filled with uncertainty. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to put you at risk. You're not a burden, Evan said firmly. I've already told you that. I made a promise to help you, and I'll keep it. You're not alone. Lyra nodded, a small tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, not wanting Evan to see her cry. But Evan did see. saw the pain in her eyes, the weight of everything she had lost. He couldn't even imagine what it must be like to lose everything too. Be hunted by the very people you once trusted. They spent the next few hours preparing to leave. Evan gathered more supplies, packed what they could carry, and made sure everything was ready for the journey ahead. Lyra helped as much as she could, though her strength was still returning. She was doing her best, but it was clear that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. When they were ready, Evan looked at Lyra and her children. They were both scared and hopeful at the same time. They didn't know what the future held, but they had a chance now. They had a chance to survive. "We'll make it through this," Evan said softly, his voice filled with confidence. "Step at a time." Lyra nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thank you, Evan, for everything." Evan smiled, his heart swelling with determination. "No need to thank me. We're family now. And family looks out for each other." With that, they stepped outside the cabin, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road ahead was uncertain, but as long as they had each other, they would find a way.